Okay, so you want to port your intake to match your heads. Well, you can do the pocket port, which is just, this maybe down to an inch or so. Or you can do it right. What I like to do is get it so I got where the, what do you call it, the most velocity is right here, even on all of them. Like right there, I need to work on that whole section right there on that bottom. So what I do is I get different bits and different sizes, and I come in here, and then occasionally I gotta measure the thickness because I don't want to bust through. I can probably fix this one with the short one. You can use a die grinder or a drill. Hard to do it one-handed to show you what I'm doing. But so basically, you just keep measuring as you go along, because you don't want one to breathe different than the other. You want them all to breathe about the same. Like this one, and I need to work on the top a little bit more. And by the way, the top is on the bottom here because I got it upside down. And on the other side, there's some debate about this. A lot of guys say, well, you want razors, you want this shit, sharp. I'm not a big fan of that idea. If you were to, actually see what's going on in a test, your car, all the gas is coming down in here, and it's happening so fast that it's actually coming up on the top. So it's the top that you want to be radical turns. And then as each pulse occurs, and depending on your overlap or your cam, it's like reversion occurs. And then it's got to wrap around. So let's say this one fires, and then you got a little bit of overlap. Now your exhaust lets it's flowing. Like when you're going real fast, it's having it so fucking fast that it doesn't matter as much as when you're in idle. So you're putting around town. If you want a single intake, well, first of all, you shouldn't even have a single plane intake on a small motor like 350. It ain't gonna do you no good. You need like an air gap. And because you got 180 degrees intake versus a 90. So on a single plane or an air gap even, you're only everything's tuned with the port runners and everything for these, one side. So this side only has 4 ports that are pulsing, and then this side has 4 ports. You get a single plane, now you got 8 ports. So the scavenging effect on your exhaust helps a little bit, but on the intake, depending on your cam, if you got a stock cam, you shouldn't even be running a single plane. You should be running that. But you got something like this. I got a 406 with 220 heads that flow 300 CFM, and that's the thing. You can't be running some intake. Well, you can, but that intake, even ported, probably only runs around 270, maybe 260 on, and some of the ports maybe even 250 after it's been ported. And 250, you know, you go to the track and you want to race it, you get up into 6,000 RPM, you're not getting the full benefit of them heads. So anyway, I like to port them where the tops are smooth, and I got a nice round radius, and I'll polish this so it's nice and round and not a sharp edge. Now on the flip side, that does have a sharp edge because I wanted a more mid-range kind of single plane type of dual plane intake. And I did that because I was going to run out of power at 5,500 RPM with that intake on a 406. Now with a big cube small block, you're better off with a single plane, depending on your heads. If you got 180 cc heads, well, even on a big block, maybe you're just fine with that. And if you're just putting around town, you're never gonna race it, get a dual plane. But if you got the torque, like my car or my engine probably got, I don't know, 550 to 600 pounds of torque. So giving up 20 pounds of torque on the low end ain't gonna matter to me. I'll still be able to drive it. I got a 2500 Hughes stall and a cam that's 28 to 68. Well, with a 406, they always rate these cams at 350s, Chevys, and small blocks or smaller small blocks. And so a cam that says 28 to 68 is truly 2400 to 6400 cam in a 406, because you got 56 more cubes, and that matters. So a lot of it has to do with your cam and your heads. Well, my cam, it'll probably start waking up at around my stall being 24 or 2500 to, it's probably a range 25 to 28, 26 maybe. So anyway, that's how I like to port it. I don't really pay much attention to the bottom so much, but I don't do the razor blade here or the sharp edge. I've seen them with that, but I don't think it's going to help any, because as the flow stops and you have overlap and then the exhaust occurs, this pulse is going to come down in there on the intake. I mean on the induction stroke, and then the piston's going to come up, and right before, right after then it's going to come back down, and as it's coming back down, right at the very end, it's going to open up the exhaust just a hair. That's going to pull a little bit of air in there. Then it's going to push the exhaust back, and you got overlap, so that valve, intake valve, is going to be open a little bit when it's coming up and pushing all that gas up. Right before it hits, right before it ejects all the exhaust gas, the intake starts to open again because it creates a scavenging effect at high RPM. And then that pulse at high RPM is just going to keep, sucking and stopping. But at low RPM, it actually is going to come back a little bit. And when it comes back a little bit, if you got a sharp edge here, can't roll around as easy. Now, that's the theory. I don't know. I mean, they did a lot of work on these things. This is a cheap intake, but if you look at a good Dart, they do this round thing too. And I'm telling you, they know what they're doing. Don't be putting a razor blade edge on these runner separators. You got to have some radius on them. That's my opinion. We will see. But porting, yeah, you got to check out your, take a gasket, lay it out. But it's more than just the gasket. are your heads raised runners or not? This originally, they sell these performance, whatever they are, the cheap intakes. They sell them with ports for like a 1204. They're like this big. And I had to take off that much meat for this. So, and depending on your intake and where it sits on the gasket, if you got like, this is a 120 thousandths gasket. So as it sits on the intake, get this set up here. Notice how I carved this gasket a little bit on the edge. That's because my heads, now I haven't carved this gasket out yet, but my heads have 60 thousandths of meat. That's all. Now you definitely don't want to overdo it. You don't want this to be bigger than your head because it's going to hit a wall. So you want to make sure, depending on where this, like if I used a 60 thou, this is a 120 thou gasket. If I used a 60 thou gasket, I would have to port these to the freaking edge like that. And I don't want to do that. I don't want that much meat. Because you can actually see holes. If you sit this intake down without a gasket on the heads and the china wall, you'll actually see a hole right along this edge of your intake hole. So sometimes you need like 120 thou to lift it up. And as you lift it up, you move it up.